Charlotte thought she had it all: a perfect marriage to the charming Thomas, a beautiful life in Paris. But everything shattered the moment she uncovered his secret family. What began as a betrayal soon spiraled into a darker mystery, one that would unravel her life in ways she never imagined. Charlotte had always dreamed of the perfect life. Growing up in a small town, she imagined a future filled with romance, adventure, and success. When she met Thomas, a sophisticated and charming man from Paris, it felt like a dream come true. He was everything she had ever wanted: tall, confident, with a sharp wit and a career that impressed everyone around him. Thomas was the kind of man who could walk into any room and instantly become the center of attention. But with Charlotte, he always seemed to reserve a quiet, tender side that made her feel special. It didn't take long for them to fall in love. Their whirlwind romance was like something out of a movie. After 2 years of dating, Thomas proposed to Charlotte during a spontaneous trip to the Eiffel Tower. It felt like fate, like their love was meant to be written in the stars. Their wedding, held in a quaint church in the heart of Paris, was beautiful, elegant but simple, surrounded by close friends and family. Charlotte had everything she had ever wanted in life: a wonderful partner, a dream wedding, and a promising future. They moved into a chic apartment in the city's 7th arrondissement, just a stone's throw from the Seine. The apartment was an extension of their fairy tale life, a 2-bedroom space with large windows that overlooked the river, a modern kitchen, and plenty of room to entertain guests. It was the kind of home everyone admired, a symbol of their success as a couple. In the beginning, everything was perfect. Thomas was attentive and affectionate, always making time for Charlotte despite his demanding work schedule. They traveled together to exotic destinations, shared late-night dinners, and spent weekends exploring the vibrant streets of Paris. Charlotte believed in their future wholeheartedly. She imagined growing old with Thomas, their lives intertwining more deeply as the years passed. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small, almost imperceptible shifts. Thomas became more distant, quieter in the evenings, and less involved in their usual activities. He started spending longer hours at the office, often coming home late, sometimes after Charlotte had already gone to bed. At first, she brushed it off. After all, his career in the finance world was demanding, and everyone said the first few years in Paris were tough. She trusted him completely and assumed that their life together would continue on its current path. But as time passed, Charlotte began to notice other signs that raised questions in her mind. Thomas's phone seemed to be permanently attached to his hand, and when Charlotte tried to glance at it, he would quickly lock it or put it down. He would sometimes leave the house for work meetings that stretched late into the night, but when he returned, he always seemed distracted, lost in thought. Charlotte told herself she was being paranoid, imagining problems that weren't there. She had to trust him, right? He was her husband. They were a team. Yet a nagging feeling wouldn't go away. She began to wonder whether the perfect marriage she had believed in so completely was truly as perfect as it appeared. Still, she pushed the doubts aside. What choice did she have? She had everything she had ever wanted: a loving husband, a beautiful life in Paris. So she ignored the whispers in her mind, continuing to live in what she thought was a happy marriage. But as the weeks turned into months, the unease only grew. There was something happening beneath the surface, something Charlotte couldn't quite pinpoint, but her heart told her that whatever it was not good. One evening, Charlotte decided to take matters into her own hands. She had been feeling increasingly uncomfortable with Thomas's behavior, and something inside her told her that tonight would be different. She had planned a surprise for him, an intimate dinner, to reconnect, to remind him of the love they shared before things had become so distant. She had picked up his favorite wine, prepared his favorite meal, and decorated their apartment with candles. She wanted to remind him of the woman he had married, the woman he had once adored. When the clock struck 6, Charlotte put the final touches on the table, lighting the last of the candles. She smiled to herself, proud of the effort she had put into making the evening special. She checked her phone to see if Thomas had messaged or called to say he was running late, but there was nothing. It was odd. He had mentioned he'd be home early, but his silence felt like an ominous sign. She didn't let it bother her. He was probably just caught up in work again. Charlotte's mind raced with thoughts of how she would greet him when he walked through the door. She imagined him smiling when he saw the meal, apologizing for his long hours, and then the two of them enjoying the evening together, just like old times. She'd always believed that their love could weather any storm. She refused to let doubt ruin the evening. But as the minutes stretched on, her anticipation began to turn into unease. It wasn't like Thomas to be this late without any explanation. An hour passed, then another. She glanced at the clock. 8 p.m. He should have been home by now. Charlotte's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over his number. Should she call him? No, she told herself. She would wait just a little longer. Perhaps he had lost track of time with work. He was always so focused on his career. Then, just as she was about to give in and make the call, she heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. Thomas was finally home. She stood up, smoothing out her dress, ready to greet him with a warm smile. But the door didn't open. Instead, she heard muffled voices, 2 voices, not just his. The second voice was unfamiliar, a woman's voice, soft but distinct. Charlotte's pulse quickened. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. What was going on? Was Thomas having a conversation with someone in the hallway? Her curiosity got the better of her, and without thinking, she silently approached the door. As she neared, she could hear the distinct sound of a child laughing. A child. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear more. The conversation outside seemed normal, almost too normal, but there was an unsettling familiarity in the voices, a warmth that was meant for someone else. The woman was speaking in a soft, tender tone, and Charlotte could hear Thomas responding, his voice lower than usual, almost apologetic. A sudden urge to open the door and confront the situation overtook Charlotte, but her body remained frozen. Her mind was racing, a million questions flashing through her head. Who was this woman? Why was Thomas speaking to her? Was she a friend? No, it didn't feel like that. It felt wrong, like something was hidden, something deep and disturbing. Charlotte moved quietly away from the door, her heart beating so loudly she thought it would burst from her chest. She grabbed her coat and slipped out of the apartment without a sound, her eyes blurred with tears she refused to shed. The city of Paris, so beautiful by day, seemed different at night. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the cobblestone streets. Charlotte walked aimlessly, her thoughts in turmoil. She needed answers. The unease she had been feeling for months had suddenly turned into something far more dangerous. a gut-wrenching certainty that something was very wrong in her marriage. She couldn't shake the image of that voice, of the laughter. Thomas had always told her that their life was just the two of them, that nothing would ever come between them. But tonight she realized the truth. There was something, or rather someone, between them, and it was something that would forever change everything. The following days were a blur of emotions for Charlotte. She couldn't stop replaying the moment she overheard Thomas and the woman in the hallway. The woman's voice, the child's laughter, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that flooded Charlotte's chest. Everything was still so fresh in her mind. She couldn't ignore the painful truth that had begun to form in her mind. Thomas, the man she trusted above all others, had a secret life. But what was the extent of it? Who was this woman? And why had Thomas kept her hidden from Charlotte for so long? Determined to uncover the truth, Charlotte decided to take matters into her own hands. Her thoughts kept drifting to the woman's voice, soft, familiar, as if she had known Thomas for a long time. It was a gut feeling, but Charlotte couldn't shake the suspicion that this wasn't just a fleeting affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. It felt like something deeper, something more ingrained. And the child's laughter, it was the final piece of the puzzle. Charlotte couldn't ignore the possibility that Thomas had a family that she knew nothing about. She began her investigation by going through Thomas's belongings, starting with his phone. It was a delicate process. She had to be careful, but she knew that if she didn't act now, she might never get the answers she needed. She had always respected Thomas's privacy, but now it felt like the only way to find out what had been going on behind her back. She knew she couldn't ignore the mounting suspicion any longer. As she scrolled through his text messages, her heart sank. There it was, messages to someone named Isabel, messages that spanned months, some even dating back to before their marriage. The messages were intimate and affectionate, more than just simple conversation. There were references to plans, to intimate moments shared, and even mentions of a child, Julian, his son. Charlotte felt as though the ground beneath her feet was giving way. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she read the messages, each one confirming what she had already feared. Thomas had been living a double life, one that she had never known existed. The pieces began to fall into place. Isabel, the woman Charlotte had overheard in the hallway, was not just some fleeting encounter. She was Thomas's partner, and they had a child together. Charlotte's mind reeled with the implications of it all. How could Thomas have kept this secret from her for so long? How could he have been so deceitful, hiding an entire family right under her nose? Every memory of their time together now felt tainted, as if everything she had known about their relationship was a lie. With shaking hands, Charlotte continued to dig. She found more details about Isabel, her background, her work as an artist, and even the address of her apartment. It was in the suburbs of Paris, a place Charlotte had never been. The discovery made everything feel even more surreal. There, in another part of the city, was a life Thomas had built with someone else, a life he had never shared with her. Charlotte's mind raced as she considered what to do next. She had so many questions but no answers. Why had Thomas never mentioned Isabel or Julian? How had he managed to keep such a massive secret hidden for years? The betrayal was overwhelming, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized that the person she thought she knew so well was nothing like the man she had married. The next step was clear. Charlotte needed to confront Thomas, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what would come next. The truth, as painful as it was finally becoming clear, but it came with a deep sense of betrayal that left Charlotte feeling hollow and lost. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life with, was not the person she thought he was. The life they had shared was a facade, and Charlotte was now staring at the ruins of her marriage, uncertain of how to pick up the pieces. The confrontation was inevitable. Charlotte had spent days questioning everything, unable to look at Thomas without seeing the lies etched into his every word, every gesture. Her heart had been ripped apart by the truth she had uncovered, and no amount of pretending could undo the damage. As much as she had tried to avoid it, she knew she had to face him, to demand the answers she had long been denied. One evening, after a long day of reflection and sleepless nights, Charlotte called Thomas. Her hands shook as she dialed his number, the phone feeling heavier with each passing second. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful, almost too cheerful. He had no idea that the life he had been carefully hiding was about to come crashing down around him. "Charlotte? Hey, what's up?" he asked, his tone light and easy. She could hear the usual warmth in his voice, and for a fleeting moment Charlotte wished she could go back to the days when everything felt simple, when everything felt right. But that was a fantasy now, something from the past that had no place in her present. "I need to talk to you," she replied, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound composed. The line fell silent for a beat before Thomas spoke again, his tone now more cautious. "Of course." "About what?" Charlotte didn't hesitate. "About Isabel and Julian." His silence was the loudest answer she could have gotten. Thomas's hesitation lasted only a second, but it felt like a lifetime to Charlotte. She could hear his breath on the other end, and then the sound of him clearing his throat. She had caught him off guard, and for a moment she revelled in that power. But the weight of what she had discovered was heavier than any temporary satisfaction. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said, his voice suddenly tight, his usual charm gone. Charlotte felt a coldness settle over her. "I know about Isabel. I know about your son, Julian. I've seen the messages. I've seen everything." There was a long pause before Thomas spoke again, his voice lower this time, almost apologetic. "Charlotte, I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want to hurt you." Charlotte's heart was pounding in her chest, a mix of anger and betrayal threatening to overwhelm her. She had prepared for this moment, prepared for the denial, for the excuses. But hearing it from him, hearing his pathetic attempt at an apology, only made everything feel worse. "Not want to hurt me?" she repeated, the words coming out in a strangled whisper. "How long, Thomas? How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been living this double life?" I didn't want to lose you," he stammered. "I never meant for it to get this far. Isabel and we've been together for years. Julian, he's my son, Charlotte, but you were always my priority. You have to believe that." Charlotte's head spun. She had always trusted him, loved him with everything she had, and now it felt like all of it had been a lie. "A priority?" she asked bitterly. "You think I'm supposed to believe that? You've been hiding another family from me for years. Thomas, you've been lying every single day. How could you do this? How could you betray me like this?" Thomas didn't have an answer. He just sat there, silent on the other end of the phone. His apologies, his explanations were empty. They were just words, words he thought might fix what he had broken. But Charlotte knew better now. She had seen the truth, and there was no going back. The man she had married was a stranger, someone she didn't recognize. "I don't want to hear it anymore," she said, her voice steady now, cold even. "I've been a fool. I trusted you, and you've taken that trust and shattered it. I want nothing more to do with you." There was no anger left in her, no more tears to cry. There was only a sense of finality, a conclusion she had been inching toward since the moment she overheard those voices in the hallway. She had no more questions. The answers had been right in front of her all along. "I'm leaving," Charlotte said, her words heavy with the weight of years of deception. "You don't get to keep me anymore." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched out for what felt like an eternity before Thomas finally spoke, his voice low, almost pleading. "Charlotte, please don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." But Charlotte hung up before he could finish, ending the conversation and, in that moment, ending their marriage. She felt no relief, no sense of victory, just a hollow emptiness, as if everything she had once believed in had crumbled away, leaving nothing but the cold, painful truth. The decision was made. The life she had built with Thomas was over. Now the only thing left to do was figure out how to move on from the wreckage he had left behind. The days following the confrontation with Thomas were a blur of emotion for Charlotte. She moved out of their shared apartment almost immediately, leaving behind the home that once symbolized her dream life. The apartment, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, now felt cold and hollow. Charlotte couldn't bear to be there anymore, surrounded by reminders of the life she had thought was real. She rented a small flat in a quieter part of Paris, away from the memories of her marriage, but no amount of distance could erase the pain she felt. Her mind was constantly racing, replaying the moments of betrayal over and over. Thomas's words, his excuses, his pleas for forgiveness, all felt like cruel echoes in her mind. Despite the anger and betrayal, part of her still longed for the man she had married, the man who had once been her partner, her best friend. But she knew now that he was nothing like the person she had thought he was. He had been living a lie, and the truth was too much to bear. Weeks passed, and Charlotte tried to focus on rebuilding her life. She threw herself into her work, spending long hours at her job and keeping busy. But the pain lingered, haunting her in quiet moments. The thought of Thomas and Isabel and the child, Julian, kept creeping into her mind. She couldn't help but wonder what their life was like. Did they live in the same city she had once called home? Had Thomas been as affectionate with Isabel as he had been with her? The questions gnawed at her, but she knew that seeking answers would only lead to more pain. Then one day Charlotte received a phone call that would alter the course of her life forever. It was from a detective she had hired to look into Isabel's death. The police had ruled it an accident, an unfortunate car crash, but the detective had uncovered new information that raised suspicions. The more he investigated, the more it seemed that Thomas's involvement in Isabel's death wasn't as clear-cut as it appeared. There were financial troubles surrounding Isabel's estate, and there was evidence suggesting that Thomas had been hiding debts he had accumulated while living a double life. Charlotte's heart sank as she listened to the detective's words. Could it be? Could Thomas have been involved in Isabel's death? The thought made her feel sick. She had been betrayed by him in so many ways. But this was something she couldn't have anticipated. The detective hinted that there might be a larger story at play, one that involved more than just a broken marriage and a secret family. As the investigation unfolded, Charlotte found herself torn between the desire for closure and the painful reality that she might never truly understand the full extent of Thomas's actions. The man she had once loved might have been responsible for the death of the woman he claimed to love, and that possibility made everything feel even darker. But without concrete evidence, the police couldn't pursue any further action. Thomas remained free, living his life without facing the consequences of his actions. Charlotte tried to move on, but the weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the unanswered questions, lingered. She realized that even though she could never have the answers she craved, she could still choose to walk away from it all. She no longer needed Thomas to define her, nor did she need the life they had shared. She had survived the heartbreak, the deception, and the overwhelming loss of trust. It was time for her to heal and to rebuild, not just her life, but herself. In the end, Charlotte never found the complete truth. The investigation into Isabel's death remained unsolved, and the shadows of Thomas's lies continued to loom over her. But Charlotte knew she had made the right choice in leaving him behind. The tragic ending to her marriage had forced her to confront the darkest parts of her past, but it also opened the door to a future where she could finally begin to heal. The road ahead was uncertain, but Charlotte had learned that even in the face of betrayal, she had the strength to rebuild, and that in the end was enough.